just a matter of time. That's why I have to carefully avoid what they say.
Yeah.
It was really I've tried many times to get like my status or money. I said, no, I know what you're up to. You're not fooling me. You can keep your damn money, keep your damn faith. I'm staying right where I am. It's worth it. Don't open up in your file.
Okay.
Except the only thing it doesn't apply to is wolf.
Will, is Charlie going to be here today? How do you all play it if you host not? Do you take it?
We'll go in order.
Will go.
Will and then me.
I'm sure it'll be plenty of hands. Yes, ma'am. Already? Man, you work fast. You want to take a look there.
Yeah, the names mean nothing these days.
That would show strongly. I don't know what I'm doing.
I feel like I'm violent.
Soon gonna be behind them.
Honestly, we don't look like each other. It's like you need to
They were playing Twister here, and Chance got all knocked down.
You know what they say about it being better to look good than feel good, right?
No, it's better
The
to feel
raspberry
good.
today, you got a corner.
That's right.
I get to make the prelude. Many of you all have met Dr. Harvey, but if you have not, I just asked to say what organization, your name and organization. Can you do that?
Do we have to tell the truth?
Do you have to tell the truth?
Yeah.
Let me check.
Do you want me to, Colonel?
Sir, good morning.
Good morning. I should know, but he's a doctor, wasn't he?
PhD in metallurgy. Metallurgy, that's right. Notre Dame, man.
Do you want us to identify ourselves before we ask?
Should be out in about 30 seconds.
There might be more.
On the riser.
Especially if you're short. I'm looking up like in the front of the theater.
So much for maintaining professional distance, right? Yeah. It makes it much more interesting. Come sit by me.
Official chair.
Is it me?
Ladies and gentlemen, the Secretary of the Army, Dr. Harvey.
Good morning. I'd like to make a brief opening statement. 2005 was a year of solid accomplishment for the Army. But in the ongoing discussion and debate about Iraq, some have said the Army is severely stretched. A few have even described it as broken. I believe these comments are incorrect. To be sure, the Army is facing great challenges, but it is more accurate to describe the Army as a full-spectrum force with a portfolio of capabilities that are relevant to the 21st century. The Army is, without a question, the preeminent land power in the world. Today's Army is the most capable, best trained, best equipped, and most experienced force our nation has fielded in well over a decade. I know that you are all well aware of the political, military, and economic progress being made in Iraq and Afghanistan. I might note due in a major way to the efforts of the United States Army. So I'm going to spend a few minutes to discuss some of the other outstanding achievements that our nation's Army has made over the past year. First, reenlistments in 2005 were the highest in over 5 years, and this trend remains strong. Over 69,500 soldiers chose to continue to answer the call to duty. This enabled the Army to just about make up for the shortfalls in recruiting. Of note, the 3rd Infantry Division, now finishing its second deployment to Iraq, achieved 136% of its fiscal year 2005 goal. In the area of recruitment, the Army recruited over 73,000 soldiers last fiscal year. We have now made our recruiting objectives for the last 7 months, and the future looks promising. The number of recruits who have signed an enlistment contract to date is almost 25% higher than it was at the same point last year. So, for example, we have already contracted for approximately 40% of our July goal of 10,450, which is the largest monthly goal of the year. And I believe that the new authorities provided by Congress, such as the $1,000 referral fee, the maximum enlistment bonus of $40,000, and the ability to provide new recruits with down payment assistance for their first home, will continue this positive trend. Under our transformation initiatives, the Army stood up 4 new modular brigade combat teams and 1 Stryker brigade combat teams, and we completed the transformation of 7 existing brigades to the modular design in the past year. We now have 37 combat or support brigades that have either completed transformation to the modular design or are well along in the process. We also realigned over 30,000 of the approximately 125,000 skill structure changes planned for the active and reserve components. The Army's ability to surge over 50,000 soldiers, including approximately 42,000 members of the National Guard, in just over a week to the Gulf Coast, and its response to the Asian tsunami and the disaster in Pakistan clearly demonstrates readiness and growing capability. Especially noteworthy is the contribution of the Army National Guard and the Army Reserves. 2005 reaffirmed that we are truly an Army of one. Thousands of Army Guardsmen and reservists rotated in and out of Iraq and Afghanistan. The 42nd Infantry Division completed the first deployment of a Guard Divisional headquarters since the Korean War. And our efforts to win the global war on terrorism would not be possible without the commitment and dedication of our citizen soldiers. Simply put, the Army could not perform full-spectrum operations without the Guard and Reserve's tremendous contribution. In 2005, the Army continued to reverse the funding shortages of the 1990s. The Army's budget included $2.9 billion for the Future Combat Systems Program, in which 18 of the critical technologies are now at a technical readiness level of 6 or higher, meaning a model or prototype has been fielded, tested in a relevant environment. The Army remains totally committed to fully fielding this essential component of Army modernization. The Army budget also included $10 billion for other research and development, $5 billion for the Army Modular Force Initiative, and $3.2 billion for reset. This latter category enabled the Army to fully reset over 9,000 pieces of equipment and over 850 aircraft at the depot level. In the area of force protection, over 4,400 new Level 1 factory-built up-armored Humvees and over 16,000 add-on armor kits were fielded in Iraq and Afghanistan last year. Almost 700,000 sets of interceptor body armor have been fielded since the beginning of the war, and over 170,000 sets of additional protection for shoulder and upper arm areas have also been fielded. These are a few of the Army's many accomplishments over the past year. I hope they give you an appreciation for what has been achieved. This is clearly an Army that is highly trained and ready, playing a pivotal role in the global war on terrorism. I look forward to 2006 as another year of solid progress. Thank you, and I will now take your questions.
Mr. Secretary, Will Dunham with Reuters. In your opening statement, you mentioned that the Army is not broken, but the Army did miss its fiscal 2005 recruiting goal. Large overseas deployments continue, and stop-loss remains in place. To what degree do you think the Army is strained, and do you think it's in danger of being broken in the future if the situation doesn't turn around?
I think first of all, recruiting, I don't think is a measure of the strain on the Army. I think the best measure of the strain is reenlistment. And as I mentioned, the reenlistment is vastly exceeding our goals. It's the highest it's been in 5 years. And I think the 3rd Infantry Division's performance of exceeding their goal by 136% is an indicator that morale is high. The soldiers in theater know they're making a difference, and the soldiers in theater are proud to be part of this effort.
Yes. I have 4 questions. 3 I'll give you now, 1 later if we have time, and they'll be brief.
I better write these down.
No, they're quick. 1, what are you doing to stimulate enlistment? 2, who qualifies for the $40,000 enlistment bonus? And 3, are you going to keep the slogan Army of One that many people find confusing, or are you going to change it, and if so, to what?
Let's see, number 1, starting last spring, as you recall, let's look at 2005, and starting last spring, we started missing our monthly goals. So we started having, at that time, I started personally getting involved in having monthly meetings with Accessions Command, and we came up with a whole basket full of initiatives, from number of recruiters to incentives to advertising to actions such as forming a referral center where we screen potential recruits, to standing up assignment incentive pay, to actually increasing the advertising budget by 65%. So a whole basket of initiatives, which I think started paying off later in the summer and early in the fall. So we took a very, very proactive approach to it. Now, in terms of to the challenge, I should add, and I think so far it's paying off. Again, it's a month-to-month thing. As I said, the rest of the year looks promising, but we're certainly not going to sit in our laurels, and we have a whole bunch of other initiatives, including the $1,000 referral bonus and essentially doubling the enlistment bonus. That will be used selectively for skills that are hard to recruit. That will not be certainly used across the board, and we'll use it judiciously where we need to have it. Your third question was?
Current slogan, Army of One. You're going to keep
well,
it?
As you know, we just recently changed our our advertising agency, and I can tell you I have no expertise at advertising, so I'm going to leave it up to them if they think that should be changed.
Secretary,
Yes.
no doubt you're aware that the buzz around the building the last couple of weeks has been Army proposals to reduce the size of the National Guard. You're obviously also aware that there's been a robust debate about whether that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Can you explain what the proposal is and what the rationale behind it is? Because
Sure.
some people
Yeah, let me
think
just say off the top, there is not going to be any reduction in the National Guard. Overall, the Army, as the active, I should say, the active Guard and Reserve, overall, the military capability will continue to grow. And let's then talk about specifically the National Guard. Our fundamental principle that we used in developing the budget and our strategy is that we will have a fully resourced and fully ready Army in terms of manning equipment that is supported by a robust and comprehensive modernization program. So that's a fundamental underlying principle that the Chief and I have developed and use when we formulate our programs and our budgets and our strategy. Now, in regards to the Guard specifically, if you look at the current baseline plan, let's take the baseline plan of 2005. The baseline plan for 2005 called for a total of 106 brigades for the National Guard, a mixture of brigade combat teams, which do the warfighting, and complemented by a number of multifunctional and functional support brigades. The number in the baseline plan was 106. The number today is 106. There is no change in the number of National Guard brigades. Now, what we did was, in both as a result of the QDR and the continuing thinking about the challenges of the 21st century, we decided that we would rebalance the mix of those brigades, so that in keeping in mind that the Guard's mission is twofold. They have an overseas operational mission, which, by the way, they performed extremely well in 2005, and they have the Homeland Defense mission. So they need a capability that's somewhat different than the active component, which is more fighting either conventional or non-conventional, non-traditional, irregular warfare. So we decided that it's appropriate to adjust the number of brigade combat teams. The baseline plan had 34. We decided that we would make that 28, which, by the way, is an increase from the number of enhanced brigades they had in the Guard, which was 15. And we would increase the number of so-called combat support brigades. And these are brigades that have MPs, engineers, chemical, air defense, civil affairs, very appropriate for Homeland Defense mission. So we increased those numbers, kept the number the same at 106. So there's no cut in force structure of the Guard at all. And there's no cut in force structure of the active, and there's no cut in force structure of the reserves.
Just to be clear,
Yeah.
I believe the Guard's end strength was 350,000. Is the end strength for the National Guard going to be the same, or will there be a reduction in the
well,
end strength?
let me talk. End strength is a legal term. What's most important is the troop strength. In 2005, the troop strength of the Guard varied between 330,000 and 340,000, average 333,000. And let me just note in that regard that I think it's fair to say that 2005 was the busiest year in the Guard since World War II, and arguably it's the busiest year in its history. They had 10 brigade combat teams deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, one headquarters, as I mentioned, and they also had a division headquarters and a brigade in Kosovo. And again, and I mentioned in my opening statement, in little over a week they surged with over 42,000 people, with an average troop strength of 333,000. So based on their outstanding performance and based on that reality and the challenge that they have in recruiting, our baseline approach is to fund to their current strength. Whatever that strength may be, we'll fund to it. So if they're now at they started the year at 333, 175. They're now at 333, 250. So they haven't changed much, although they're doing much better in recruiting and retention. Their end strength is the same. If they can grow that end strength, we'll fund to that end strength. So it's really a more realistic approach, and I think it reflects. It's a better, from my point of view, it's a better way to manage this. Yeah.
How much will you save if
Tom.
you cut from 350 to 333 in the Guard?
I don't know if I know that off the top of my head. You could certainly, we can get you that number. It's easy to figure out.
So you'll fund them to what they can grow to?
For what they can resource to. Yeah, if they grow to 338, we'll fund to 338.
Grow to 350?
We'll fund to 350.
And over what span of time? Over this current year or next year, or the FIDUP, or what?
Yeah, when they get there. I mean, it's a much better way, I think, to approach this. And in the same approach to the reserves, Tom, too. Yes.
But Dr. Harvey, many members of the National Guard have had to leave up-armored vehicles, equipment behind in Iraq. Some lost, some in Katrina. It was just destroyed. Arguably, the National Guard should have an increased funding in the next budget to replace
they
this
absolutely
equipment.
do. And let me say, this not only applies, stay behind equipment left behind, it not only applies to the Guard, it also applies to the active component. Remember, during the 90s, not to get into the details, the Army was underfunded in terms of equipment. We are currently still making up for that. So the stay behind equipment is one way to manage that. It also is a very good it's very good management in terms of logistics. In the FIDUP, there is $20 billion for the Guard equipment. So the Guard will be equipped. The Guard is going to be organized and equipped in the same way the active Army is going to be organized and equipped. The brigade combat teams, the organizational structure of everything in the Guard is the same as it is in the active. The numbers are just different, but they will be fully resourced. Again, the principle that the chief and I developed is fully resourced and ready Army in terms of manning and equipment, again, supported by a very robust and comprehensive modernization program, which for the ground forces is called the Future Combat Systems Program.
How many years is that $20 billion?
The Future Years Defense Program.
For 5 years?
6, yes, and then yes.
Dr. Harvey,
yes.
Congress recently passed legislation on the inhuman treatment of detainees. In that, they referred to the Army Field Manual as the guiding document. The Army finished at least its initial draft last year. Can you talk about what the discussion, the debate is at this point on how to finish that, how to make it agree with the legislation and or comply with the legislation, and also how it will address the Guantanamo issue?
Sure. Now, I'm not going to get into any details of it, but let me just mention, we do have, for some reason, unbeknownst to me, nobody reports that we do have an Army Field Manual. Its number is 3452. And so it exists, and it is compliant with all applicable U.S. laws, DoD directives and policies, and it's consistent with the principle of humane treatment, and it certainly prohibits torture. So there is a manual. What we're doing is in the process of lessons learned from Iraq and Afghanistan, from a totally different war that we're involved in. Like we do everything else, we continue to improve it. So the current upgraded or improved manual, which goes under the number, as you know, 2-22.3, was being prepared last year. And with the onset of the McCain Amendment and as part of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2006, it became clear that this was more than an Army manual. This is a DoD manual now. Therefore, I think to be fair about it, we needed to have a coordination and review by all services because it applies to everybody. So the decision by the Secretary of Defense was made that, one, that we in a sense are an executive agent. This is going to be a DoD-wide manual that the whole DoD needed to get involved in the review, which they have and are. The initial review is over. revisions and suggestions are being incorporated, and it'll go out for final review as we speak. And I expect the forecast is to be published within 1 to 2 months. So that's where it is, ma'am.
Dr. Harvey, Lisa Meyer from AP Radio. You were talking before about the increase in the combat support brigades. Would it be fair to characterize the increase as a direct reaction to performance on the ground during the hurricanes here at home last year?
We are clearly, as we do from the irregular warfare in Iraq, we clearly take in real time the lessons learned from all our military operations and incorporate those into the force. So one thing we certainly learned in terms of networking, which will be spun out from the Future Combat Systems program, the functionality that I explained in these combat support brigades is very important in terms of security, very important in terms of chemical. The Guard is also reorganizing and standing up these civil support teams that will provide consequent management. So there's a bunch of other affiliated organizations being stood up by the Guard, which is in response to that. John?
Was that a yes?
Yes.
Mr. Secretary, you've heard the controversy over add-on body armor recently. I think Hillary Clinton wrote something in the New York Times
I
today.
just wrote Mrs. Clinton a letter.
Could you just tell us, do you think that the criticisms of the lack of some of these add-on armor being in the field, is that legitimate at all? And do you think they ought to be mandatory once they're sent to the field?
Well, you know, John, as you appreciate, and I think as everybody has read, what we're trying to do here is balance the mobility with protection, and soldier protection clearly is a key element, and it's very important to the Army in general and me personally, and I personally spend a lot of time on it. Now, we have continuously improved the armor that we provide for the soldiers from the beginning, starting with the addition of these so-called SAPI plates, small arm protection inserts. That was then, without really a definite threat, we then changed to an improved material, which we call ESAPI. Then we provided, which I mentioned, these deltoid plates. We're now in the process, based on a request from theater, providing side plates. Even though the evidence shows that this is not a major threat, we have an adaptive enemy that we're trying to get ahead of. So we are going to be fielding, starting next month, side plates. So it's an evolving thing. That's going to add weight, of course. You've read where certain soldiers aren't happy about that, but we think it's in their best interest to do this. Again, keeping in mind that they need the flexibility, they need the mobility and agility to be effective. So, as we've noted, you can have protection, but if you can't move, you may get shot in the leg or something because you can't move that fast. So it's a compromise.
Should they be able to opt out, though, if they don't want to?
No, I don't think so. Tony?
To follow up on that, the Marines started fielding prototypes of their side SAPI armor in September in response to this Armed Forces Pathology Institute report. Why did the Army wait until now to put on emergency order these 250,000?
We didn't wait. The request came in September. It was tested. Remember, when you have a request, you just don't go buy something off the shelf. It has to be designed, tested, and demonstrated, and we did that in a matter of 3 months. Now, I can't certainly speak for that, and I won't speak about that since it's classified, that particular medical examiner's report. But I can tell you this, that we have looked through casualty reports, and approximately 5% of the KIA are from gunshot wounds, and we have found over the last 3 years of casualty reports, we've found one gunshot wound to the side, only one. So that's one too many. And again, we think it's prudent to do this because of the adaptive nature of the enemy, so we're going to do it. But there wasn't an overwhelming body of evidence to say that should be the case. Yes, sir.
Mr. Secretary, Jim Mannion from Agence France-Presse. We're watching a crisis build with Iran. What gives you confidence that the that the Army is large enough to handle additional major contingencies now?
Let me just answer that question in general without getting any specifics, because that's certainly in the purview of the President and the Secretary of Defense. But okay, good. Oh, two birds with one stone. We have a readiness deployment tool, which really a fundamental tool by which we operate the Army. We call it the Army Force Generation Model, which, God bless you, which you may be. It is cold in here, which you may be familiar with. And this is a model in which we take the forces both in the reserves and the active, and we rotate them through various stages prior to deployment. A reset, remanufacture stage, recapitalization stage, and then followed by, part of that, training, rest, refreshment, all in the first year. Second year, intense training. Third year, deployment. So that's for the active. So if you have, in today's world, 18 to 20 brigade combat teams deployed, we can surge with the Army Force Generation Model another 18 to 20 brigade combat teams. So as these forces come around these circles of deployment, these cycles of deployment, they go from low stages of readiness in the first year and to increased readiness, and then in mid-second year, they're ready to go. And the reserves, so 1 year deployed and 2 years at home station is our baseline cycle for the active, and 1 year deployed and 5 years at home station is the baseline cycle for the National Guard and the reserves. So we have the capability, to answer it straightforward, to surge to any crisis that the President may ask us to do at Tom.
On those lines, some force structure documents that I saw showed that the Army plans in 2008 to go back to the 482,000 active end strength number. Is that accurate?
No.
You don't plan on doing that?
No. If you want me to talk about the end strength plan, I can talk about that, Tom. Yeah. We have an end strength plan that is follows, and again, as I like to say, everything in the Army is a little complicated. It's hard to answer straightforward, but let me try to give you just a second of background. And that is, there's three components to the Army. There's the operational Army, which fights the wars. There's the institutional Army that generates the force. And we have this large overhead account when you're neither one or the other, in this overhead account called the TTHS, the Transient Trainee Holding Students. It's probably the world's largest overhead account. Those three components add up in FY04 to approximately 482,400. So that's a baseline that we established in the FY04. Our plan, our strength plan, is to grow the operational Army from 315,000, which was a subset of the 482, to 355,000. And this is again over the future year defense plan to FY11, through mil-to-civ conversion, to reduce the number of soldiers in the institutional force by about 30,000, from which 110 to about 80, and then to better manage the TTH account for about 10,000. So if you look at the bookends, our plan is to start out with 482.4 and an FY11 because of the dynamics of when you can add and when you can subtract. And when you can convert, to end at 482.4. So in the interim years, we're going to grow above the 482 because we're going to do the operational Army near term, and we're going to convert the institutional Army long term. So you're going to see an increase and then a slow decrease over the future years defense. That is the so we're going to grow that part of the Army that fights.
And you also mentioned about the National Guard brigades will go, combat brigades, from 34 to 28.
Yeah, but keep in mind when you say that, they're really coming from 15 to 28 rather than 15 to 34. So they're increasing. They're damn near doubling. Yeah.
But you proposed 34, now it's 28. The active, I believe, was 43, now it's going to be 42.
That's correct.
Which will give you 70.
That's correct.
But both you and Dr. Chu told the Hill last fall that you needed 77.
That was our baseline plan, but remember, Tom, we're we're coming out of a QDR, and in the QDR, we just, out of the QDR, this force structure we think is appropriate to the threat.
In September, you told the Hill 77 were needed.
Well, that was our baseline plan, but the QDR is the QDR, and yes, ma'am.
I'm Pam Hess with UPI. I want to clean up a couple of your answers. Well, allow you to
Thank you for that
elaborate, let's
compliment.
say. Could you explain how much weight do the additional new plates add, and why?
2.5 pounds apiece.
And why don't you think soldiers should be able to opt out on that? A lot of them are saying we're already carrying at least 70 pounds.
Because we think it's in their best interest to wear.
Everybody, not just gunners, are going to be
That's right.
wearing this.
That's
Okay,
right.
and could you tell us about, you said that the baseline for the forces is 1 on, 2 off. How many of your brigade combat teams or divisions, or however you're counting it, actually are at that baseline right now? Because ones that I've talked to are
We're
elsewhere.
migrating there. We're not exactly at the 1 and 2 right now. We're probably 1 year deployed, and maybe and it depends on the brigades. Some are at 15 months, some are at 22 months. But we're migrating. Remember, we're growing the number from 33, and as Tom mentioned, to 42 rather than 43. Remember, again, this is all growth. We're growing the combat power. We're growing the capability of the Army to perform non-traditional missions and non-traditional. It's all growth, both in the active and in the Guard. It's all growth. It's just we're changing the mix because we're balancing capability to fit missions. National Guard is a dual mission. And then we're superimposing on that the threat and the analysis, and we think those numbers are correct.
Your surge capability, though, that you talked to Jim about, is then predicated on a future force as opposed to the current force. And Iran poses a potential current threat. So,
yeah, but we can still. But
have.
then we're talking about not if, it's the numbers, and we still think we can surge with 15 to 20 at the current time.
Secretary,
Yeah, and then
Rick, you've had plenty.
Yeah.
No, I got
That's
my
right.
first-
I'm the equal opportunity. That's what I'm doing.
Rick Whittle with the Dallas Morning News. You said earlier that 5% of the KIAs had been from gunshot wounds. What percent have been from IEDs?
The majority of the other have been from I can't give you exact numbers, but explosions, which is IEDs, mortar, rocket-propelled grenades, that whole listing.
On the IEDs, what kind of progress has been made, if any, in learning how to counter that threat better?
Oh, there's tremendous progress.
It seems like the number of casualties just keeps
No,
going.
the number of incidents, the number of IEDs have gone up, but the effectiveness of those explosions has been cut by 66%, and I'm not going to get into any more detail than that. And then to follow up, and then Mark, you had
number 5 and my last one, I assure you.
Okay.
In the old days, and by the way, I'm Ivan Scott with WTOP and KNX in Los Angeles, some other stations. But in the old days here, under the old QDR, it was the Pentagon, including the Army, had the ability to fight and win 2 major battles at the same time. Then that was ameliorated somewhat to say fight and win 1 and go to the capital of the next one. Can you give us a sneak preview of what lies ahead in February? What's the current strategy? If we have to go to war with Iran, can we win that in Iraq at the same time?
This is what? This is the 18th, or is this the 18th? I mean, all you got to do is wait till the 6th of February. The QDR report will be sent along with the budget, and that'll answer all your questions.
No sneak preview.
No sneak preview. Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Secretary, on the subject of IEDs, has the Army been addressing this report of new jumping or flying IEDs that are fired off at aircraft for proximity sort of explosion?
Yeah, that's an anticipated threat. To my knowledge, we have not. I don't know if we've seen. We may have seen one of those, but to my knowledge, we have not seen a lot of those so-called jumping IEDs.
Have you got tactics to combat that sort of thing?
Yeah, we got systems and tactics, and I won't certainly go into that.
Could I ask you one question about the mil-civ conversion?
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
What sorts of positions are being converted to civilian? Is it? I think I understand that most of the medical corps is going to become civilian.
I wouldn't say most. No, there are medical corps. There, it started simply with guards. It started simply, and then administrative positions. I mean, and there's certainly I can't get into the details in this forum, but we've identified over 20,000 positions that we think that can be converted to civilians and soldiers, and use those positions essentially in the operating force. So we have a in-depth, careful analysis that is going on, and so far it's identified 20,000 positions. Now, in order to convert those, of course, we have to do that very thoughtfully and very methodically, and that takes time.
Yeah, I had a question about a follow-up on the National Guard issue. You said that you were going to fund over $333,000 on an as-needed basis. Would you do that through supplementals, or how exactly would you fund an increase?
Well, remember, there is some flexibility in the budget. I mean, the budget is not exact. You have an exact budget as planned, and when you execute the plan, you have some overages and underages, and if that's a word. And there's some things you underspend and some things you overspend, but we also have reprogramming capabilities. So if we need to reprogram, we'll reprogram. But we do have flexibility within certain guidelines, and we'll again, I think this is the approach to budgeting that I come from, as you know, from the private sector. This is kind of how you budget. You budget to the number of people that you have and you think you're going to have.
Can you release the letter that you sent to Senator Clinton?
Senator Clinton has it. It was in response to a letter from her. Right. She sent me a letter, and I responded to it. And I'd have to look into it. I'm sure she can.
Tell us what the main point.
It was essentially in response to her concern about coming out of the Marine Army, the medical examiner's report, and I told her all the actions that we have taken and we're taking over the past to provide soldier protection. And as I indicated, we have made a significant number of steps, and by the way, we'll continue to do that. We will continue to upgrade and improve, take lessons learned, and improve the armor where we can. Also, we'll do the same thing with vehicles. And we're doing the same thing. We have made a number of enhancements, as you know, to the armor that we put on our variety of vehicles, which the most well-known is the Humvee, and we'll continue to do that. And we have improvements as we speak in progress to do that.
Do you think the criticism is off the mark?
The criticism of who?
The criticism of the Army for
yes, I do. I do. I think we've been. Soldier protection is one of the high priorities of the Army and myself, and we I think we have a proud record of action, reaction, and trying to get ahead of the game. As I said, ESAPI was put in without a threat. There was no threat, apparent threat. We did it to try to get ahead of a very adaptive enemy.
Well,
yeah. You haven't talked yet.
Yeah. So you said that based on the KIA gunshots, only one has happened on the side. What about other, IEDs, other explosions? I mean, have there been any other deaths to the side of?
We didn't. We looked at casualty reports. We did not do a medical examiner's report. Just let me say that we have to leave it up to the experts to do that. But an explosion. When an explosion which gives you multiple wounds, I'll leave it up to the doctors to assign a specific area of death. I certainly don't have that capability. We just looked at casualty reports.
So what I'm trying to understand is if you have only one KIA to a gunshot to the side, if that threat is that small, why would you?
Because one's too many. Okay, two, because of all the publicity. We got to be careful of the adaptive enemy. And 3, there's injuries. And if we can prevent injuries, that's worth it. I think 2.5 pounds is worth it. So we're trying to anticipate an adaptive enemy, and we're trying to prevent injuries to the soldiers. So I personally think it's worth it, yes.
Dr. Harvey, there's some members of the National Guard in this country that have less than 10% of their equipment on hand, ready to go in the case of a natural disaster, homeland defense issues. It's a midterm election year. There are governors that are up for re-election this year. How are you going to respond to those governors when they say, we need more equipment?
I dispute your numbers. You'd have to prove to me that there's 10%.
A member of the Idaho National Guard said that they have less than 10%
well,
of their equipment on
I'd
hand.
have to look at that because that's not the facts that I get. They're not fully equipped. And they do have shortages, but they have, I don't think 10% is an accurate number. And they did surge with 42,000 members in over a week to Katrina, and by all accounts, they did a very, very good job.
But your plan is over 5 years to refund them, sir. So how, there are natural disasters now, this year. How, I mean, they're a Guard that can't respond to them. How do you respond?
No, I disagree with your premise. The Guard can respond. We're just talking about a matter of having more radios and you know, soldiers. And I'm with them. They want to have 100%, but they're adaptive, they're flexible. Their readiness levels for equipment are well beyond 10%. Tony?
On the budget equipment National Guard issue, the budget equipment National Guard,
yeah.
The same Gordon-England memo that approved the Army force structure cuts from 28 to 28 brigades and 42 brigades.
There's no cuts, Tony.
Well, lays out $11 billion in cuts over the FIDB that the Army's offered that implied coming from Army National Guard equipment type cuts and personnel cuts. Where does the $11.1 billion come from?
This is, believe me, this is the only town where growth is a cut. We are growing the Army. The Army, and I'm not going to get into budget numbers, but the Army budget is very, very acceptable to the Army. So just stand by for
Can you tell us where you're going to make the $11 billion in cuts?
There was that's kind of a virtual. There is not a cut in the. There will be no cut in the Army budget. There'll be no cut in the DoD budget. There's no cuts.
Reduction from growth, though. I mean, how much is an $11 billion reduction? Where's that coming from?
Just wait 2 weeks and you'll see.
Well, you're here now.
I'm not going to. This is the president's budget, and I'm not going to get into the details of the budget. But you know, the way you described it is not correct. There is going to be growth. There is growth. You're saying there's not going to be as much growth. So there's not going to be as much growth. We in the Army are pleased with the proposed budget as submitted to the president. The president will make the final decision. It's his decision. It's his budget. You know, it's the president's budget. But coming out of the Pentagon, we were out of the DoD. We were pleased with it. And if you just wait 2 more weeks, Tony, you'll get it.
Okay, before we're out of time.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
Of history and understanding what is at stake. In the past, governments would change in Iraq through a coup. Former government officials and prime ministers and ministers will be sent to the gallows. This time we are talking about a legal, orderly process by which authority and government will be transferred. The Chief Justice has come back to us with a recommendation or an opinion, a legal opinion, about what needs to be done. With the election results being announced, the new assembly will meet. We'll be electing a president and 2 vice presidents. These will, in turn, nominate unanimously a prime minister, who will have to get the vote of confidence from the National Assembly. And with the formation of that government, with that prime minister, the interim government will dissolve and hand over authority to the newly elected, democratically elected government of Iraq.
Mr. Minister, how long do you think that will take until you get to that point in the process?
We hope it will not take long, but we are talking about a political process. The era of certainty of politics in Iraq is over. In the past, it used to be Saddam Hussein who would make decisions on behalf of every Iraqi. We need to wait for the outcome of the elections and the composition of the parliament, and there will be a lot of political bargaining between the various blocs, and hopefully it will not take long, but there will be some uncertainties involved, and that is what we have asked for. We have asked for a democratic process, and depending on the outcome of the elections and depending on the players in the new parliament and how they will view things and what will be their interest, the time will be dictated by that.
Tony?
Sir, I'm Tony Capascio with Bloomberg News. What role do you see the U.S. military playing in a post-election Iraq? There's an expectation in the United States that the U.S. will be able to draw down forces as more and more Iraqi security forces are trained. Do you see our presence there for the foreseeable future?
Well, first, let me say the following. These elections would not have been possible without the liberation of Iraq and without the sacrifice of the American and coalition forces in Iraq. And I hope the American public understand that those sacrifices have not been in vain. We're talking about democratic transformation in the heart of the Islamic Middle East, and it is a worthy objective. In terms of the long-term presence of American and multinational forces in Iraq, these depends on the conditions in Iraq. It is our collective judgment, collective by that I mean both Americans as well as the Iraqi side. We need to develop indigenous Iraqi security capabilities. At the end of the day, security in the urban centers of Iraq can only be assured by Iraqis. Iraqis have to step up to the challenge and assume direct responsibility for security. We will be in need for international support for some time to come, because on one hand, we're dealing with a security threat from terrorism, but at the same time, we're talking about a tough neighborhood, and the overall security environment of Iraq would require continued international engagement. My hope is that after the elections and the formation of an elected Iraqi government, the security dynamic will change and more reliance will be placed on indigenous Iraqi forces. And that will undoubtedly change the dynamics of relations between the multinational forces and the domestic Iraqi security organization. The exact nature and the time scale that we're talking about depends on condition. The Prime Minister recently spoke of a condition-based redeployment or rearrangement of international forces in Iraq, and I think this is the right thing to do. Instead of talking of a specific timetable, we need to talk about the conditions that will be required in order to change the arrangements and redeploy forces. But all of us are in agreement that we need to focus more on expediting the training and equipping of Iraqi forces so that Iraqis assume the responsibility of defending their own country. But we will be in need of the support of the international community for some time to come.
The United States has talked about embedding up to 10,000 troops in Iraqi units to help facilitate that accelerated training. What's your view on that? Is that a good idea?
Can you repeat that, please? I did not hear the question well.
Some in the United States military have talked about putting in as mentors as many as 10,000 U.S. troops into Iraqi units to help expedite the training that you seek. Is that a good idea from your standpoint?
We are working very closely with the command of the multinational forces at expediting the training and equipping program for the Iraqi military forces, including the utilization of military advisors and expertise with Iraqi units to help embolden the domestic indigenous Iraqi capabilities. That will undoubtedly be helpful, together with other measures that are being considered as we speak.
Well, Mr. Minister, we've come to the end of our time, and we know that you're very busy. We want to wish you the best and let you know that all our eyes will be watching this weekend for this historic event also. Thank you.
Historic event, and history is being made by the people of Iraq with the help of the multinational forces, and the United States, the United Kingdom, and other coalition partners. We'll make it. And thank you very much.
No Iraqis, many of whom we've heard from, have been concerned about us just pulling out en masse on June 30th. Ambassador Bremer will get on a plane and go home, but General Kimmett and his colleagues will still be here after June 30th to ensure that the security situation continues to be addressed. Someone who hasn't asked a question. Yes, sir.
Mr. Jan, عادل ناجي من عكاظ السعودية. سيد جان سمعنا عن وجود مفاوضات بينكم.
We heard that there are negotiations between you and Muqtada Sadr, and there are elements from the governing council and others. Where did this situation arrive? As to the crime of murder of Abdulmajid al-Khoi, we understood that the family of Abdulmajid al-Khoi dismissed this case and withdrew it. Where did this situation arise to?
We have not been involved in any discussions. What was your second question?
ما هو سؤالك الثاني؟ That the murdered person al-Khoi, he's accused of that. There was an agreement between the family of the murdered person and those people. Where did this lead to?
This is the first I'm hearing of that. I have no comment on that. Yes.
This is to General Kimmett. You spoke about 120,000 American or coalition forces here. Can you tell us exactly how many of the coalition forces are engaged in the areas of Fallujah and Al-Mahdi militias? And there are reports, journalistic reports, they say about the destruction of convoys and movement. You have not told us about the losses on the coalition side.
With regards to how many of our forces are involved in Fallujah and some of these other operations, a very, very small percentage, probably, well, I'd estimate somewhere on the order of 1.5 brigades worth of forces are directly involved in combat operations at this time in terms of ground maneuver forces. And it's a very small percentage of what's available to be drawn upon here in Iraq should we need to move forces from one sector to another. Now, maybe a little bit off on that estimation, and maybe a little more, perhaps 2.5 brigades, but nonetheless, whether it's 1.5 or 2.5, that is a very, very small percentage of the available combat force here in the country. Your second question about convoys, I don't think I understood it. Could you repeat your second question, please?
هل ممكن أن تعيد سؤالك الثاني بالنسبة إلى الconvoys? It is relating to that there were losses on the coalition forces side. We heard that there were equipment have been destroyed by the American forces. You have not provided an account of how much losses have occurred in this particular conflict.
I don't think I really understand your question, except unless you were trying to find out from me how many coalition forces have been killed in this operation up to date. Is that correct?
So he means equipment, how much losses?
How many people killed? I'm talking about how many tanks, how many Humvee. You don't give us the
لم تذكر لنا عدد
You're right. But the numbers are very, very small. We continue to lose small numbers of Humvees on a daily basis, partially damaged by IEDs and such. And I think we had today some fuel trailers that were blown up. But as a percentage of the total force, I'm not certain that we have lost any tanks. I'm not certain that we've lost any Bradley fighting vehicles. I have no reports that we've lost any light armored reconnaissance vehicles. as part of any of these operations. I suspect that you may have been reading accounts from some of the more extremist websites, more extremist publications that would suggest somehow that there have been large losses, but those just don't square with the facts. So I'll see what I can find out in terms of the actual numbers and get them to you tomorrow.
So a last question.
Thank you, Dan. Sewell Chan with the Washington Post. Just a question for you, Dan. What is Ambassador Bremer's response or reaction to the resignation of Abdul Karim Mahood Mohammadawi from the Governing Council today, the resignation of Abdul Basit Turki from the position of Human Rights Minister, and also former Interior Minister Nouri Badran's allegation that he was asked to leave by Ambassador Bremer because he's a Shiite and two Shiites could not occupy both the Interior and Defense Ministry positions?
The only resignation that I'm aware of that's final and has been formally announced is that of Nouri Badran's, and Ambassador Bremer issued a statement saying he was grateful for Mr. Badran's service to the country. He served at a very difficult time in a very challenging environment, and was unaware that he was going to resign, but respected the decision, and he has since moved quickly to replace him. It's a free country. What a difference a year makes. And while we welcome his service, we understand if he wants to step down, it's his prerogative. And as I said, we're fast at work on addressing the security situation, and Ambassador Bremer moved quickly to replace Mr. Badran. The basis for what candidates are selected or nominated for various ministries is based purely on who we believe is the most qualified candidate available for the job. Thank you, everybody.